Well, today we are officially 1 week away from Christmas. Kind of snuck up on us. But what better Sunday to speak about joy? Now, our theme this Advent, and we've mentioned this every week, it is living Christmas. Living Christmas. How can we experience Christ born anew in us this year? And how can we share that new life with others? We're asking that every single week about all of the scriptures and the themes that we're looking at. And so far, we've talked about being reconciled with one another and united in Christ as a way we experience a living Christmas and can share that reconciliation with others. We've talked about how to hold on to hope in tough times and how to encourage others to do the same. And last week we talked about being at peace, about how God can work in us and through us to make us whole, to help fit all the pieces of our life together, our marriages, our family, our community. That's peace. That's shalom. But what about joy? How can we experience a living Christmas through the gift of joy? Joy is certainly one of the big themes of Advent and the Christmas season. As we went for our walk yesterday, I saw people with, lawn ornaments, giant joy spelled out in the yard. It's lit up every single night. I saw joy written on flags that were hung on sides of homes. Joy is it's a part of what we do here at Christmas. And we think about that story from Luke where Mary recites her song of joy and praise when she's told that she will be the bearer of Jesus, our Savior. Mary, did you know? Yes, she knew, and it's time to let go of that song. Gabriel told her, go back and read Luke 2. Mary knew more than anybody else knew. Mark Lowry needs to write a new song. But since we're closing in on the completion of our Bible year, I want to turn our attention to a different passage, one from James, that also helps us focus on joy. And this is from James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. My brothers and sisters, James writes, think of the various tests you encounter as occasions for joy. After all, you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. Let this endurance complete its work so that you may be fully mature, complete, and lacking in nothing. Think of all these various tests as occasions for joy. That's one of those Bible passages that really sounds like, yeah, that's right. That's the way, that should be a great attitude. But then you actually stop and think about what it's like to face these kinds of trials and temptations and challenges, and you think, man, James was crazy. Stop and think about that. How in the world can you think about the various tough times, the things that we go through as occasions for joy? It's occasions for misery is what it is. I can't imagine a friend coming to me who's going through just one of the toughest patches in their life, and after listening to their story, looking at them and saying, you know what, this really sounds like an occasion for joy. I'm not sure they'd come to me with their problems anymore after that. Or think about it this way. Christmas is a season of joy, of course. Again, we say it, we sing it, our joy increases the closer we get to Christmas, and it's just a result of all the festivities and the fun. Joy is just in the air. And yet so many in this season, the experience is just the opposite. There are some who are isolated from their loved ones and their friends, and they just don't experience that joy because they don't have an opportunity to get together. That's one of the things that Ann and I as pastors have, it's just a part of being a pastor. We don't get to be, our extended family is all over the country. We don't get to see them at Christmas. And so we don't experience that part of the joy. It's great joy for us to lead the church in this season. And so that helps it balance out. But many are in that situation where they just are disconnected. And some not just physically disconnected. There's families that are emotionally disconnected, that they get together, but it's kind of an occasion for them to, kind of look like Charlie Brown there. Oh, great, they're coming to our house again this year. Oh, dear. There's others who face this season grieving the loss of a loved one after a lifetime of Christmases spent together, and so the season isn't experienced with joy, but with heartbreak and longing. There's others who have faced a new reality of Christmas after going through a divorce, and you've got to navigate shared custody, and one year you have to do early Christmas, and the next year late Christmas, and it just causes all this extra stress. And there's others that the stress of trying to make everything just picture perfect. You see the pictures on social media or in the magazines of, oh, that's what my house should look like. And you get that pressure of the decorating and the baking and the shopping and the parties, and it sometimes feels more like a burden than a joy. There's a lot of folks for who this really is a joyful season, but in study after study of psychologists, they said, this month of the year, December through the first part of the new year, there is a dramatic increase in reports of depression and anxiety, of drug overdoses, and of suicide. And so if this is the season for joy, we seem to be missing something. We seem to be missing something. We need to dig a little bit deeper, I think, if we want to experience a living Christmas, and not just for our own sakes, again, because for many of us, this is a joyful season, but there's so many out there who are hurting. And so perhaps we need to dig a little deeper for their sake. Now, in the context of James, as he was talking about this joy that we should be sharing, of course, James was the brother of Jesus. In the book of Acts, we learn that he was a leader in the Jerusalem church. He was one of the primary apostles. He wasn't one of the 12 disciples, but he was an important apostle in the early church. And he wrote this letter to other Jewish Christians, and these who had fled Jerusalem because of persecution. That was a hardship he was talking about. The people that had been in this Jerusalem church who had to flee because of persecution. They were facing intense trials because of who they were following, this crucified Messiah who ushered in a new kind of kingdom where the currency wasn't power or prestige, but sacrificial love. We've looked at that over and over in the New Testament and why this persecution came. And so they were no doubt discouraged. The fact that they had to flee and leave everything behind. They felt perhaps, as we all do when we go through hard times, that God had forgotten them or was disinterested or maybe even was punishing them in some way. And so their newfound faith was being stretched. And so James wrote this letter for a couple of reasons. One, he wanted to encourage them to persevere, to encourage them to stand fast. But he also wrote it to challenge them. He wanted to challenge them to live with faithfulness and to live with wisdom. Here are the verses that he said right there at the beginning of James, but this time this is from the Message Bible, the paraphrase that Eugene Peterson wrote. He says, "Consider it a sheer gift, friends, when tests and challenges come at you from all sides. You know that under pressure your faith life is forced into the open, and it shows its true colors. So don't try to get out of anything prematurely. Let it do its work, so you become mature and well-developed, not deficient in any way." Essentially what James is saying is that the difficult times we go through, the challenging times, personally or in our families, that they don't have to be in vain. That God can use them to strengthen our faith and to deepen our love for God and for others. And James is clear, God is not the cause of all of these, the source of all these trials and human suffering. We often say, God doesn't give us more than we can handle. What James is saying is God didn't give you that to begin with. Just a few verses later in verse 13, he says, "No one who is tested should say, 'God is tempting me.' This is because God is not tempted by any form of evil, nor does he tempt anyone." So James is clear, don't put this on God. The suffering is hard. But what he wants to affirm is that God can use anything and anyone over time to strengthen and mature their faith. Now, in the moment, when we're going through a difficult time in our life, again, we're not thinking, well, at least God is making me stronger or more mature. No, we're thinking this really is not fun to go through, and I'd really rather not be in this situation right now. This is just hard. The question for me as I was thinking about joy and how we experience it through the lens of James here is how can we get from the very lived experience of trials, of temptations, of suffering, of hardship, of just the rough patches we go through, how can we get from there to joy? Because it doesn't seem like a very straight line. How can we get from one experience to the other? The first insight I came across is that we need to remember that joy and happiness aren't the same thing. Countless Christian writers reflecting on the faith said, happiness sort of depends on the circumstances that you're in. Happiness happens because good things are happening and they make us happy, but joy is different. The great preacher from last century, Dwight L. Moody, put it this way: happiness is caused by things that happen around me, and circumstances will mar it. But joy flows right through trouble. Joy flows on through the day. Joy flows in the night as well as in the day. Joy flows through persecution and opposition. It is an unceasing fountain bubbling up in the heart, a secret spring the world cannot see and doesn't know anything about. So happiness happens because good things are happening, but joy itself, we learn, is a gift. It's a gift of the Holy Spirit. In Galatians, when they spoke of the fruits of the Spirit, it was love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and the others. It's not a result of circumstances. One of the most moving statements on joy in Scripture was from the little book of Habakkuk, We read it in the late summer. It's one of those minor prophets, just 3 chapters. And at the end of the 3rd chapter, Habakkuk for the entire book has been struggling with the suffering of his people. And at the very end of chapter 3, he says, though the fig tree does not blossom, and no fruit is on the vines, though the produce of the olive fails, and the fields yield no food, though the flock is cut off from the fold, and there's no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. Habakkuk and his people, they have no reason to be happy, and they aren't. And yet they still find joy. Even though his present circumstances were dire, there was precious little to celebrate. Nonetheless, he was determined that he would rejoice. He was determined that he would lift his eyes with expectations, that God was with them and that God would lead them. Happiness is logical. Joy is a gift. We don't create it. We can't fake it. We can't force it, but we can receive it as a grace. And here's the other insight that I think is so important to remember about joy is that we can share it. I came across this story in the newspaper this past week. I absolutely loved it. I went back to it time and again. And the article began this way: for the past 9 years, George Dowling has dreaded December. Once was his favorite month. But since losing his wife in 2013, Christmas is a trying time. This is their wedding picture from 1951. His late wife, Lucille, lived for the holiday season. He said she decorated their Christmas tree the day after Thanksgiving. She adorned their home with festive trimmings. Christmas cookies were constantly coming out of the oven. She was Christmas, George said. They were married 70 years. She did everything big, all of the cooking, all of the baking, and she died on December 1st, 2013. And that year, George and his daughter Susan took down the tree, and they canceled Christmas. His daughter said, my father just couldn't handle it. He's been with only one woman his whole life, and she's gone. So when December 1st hits, my dad gets really, really sad. And so the following year, in 2014, as December rolled around, Susan was brainstorming ways to try to cheer up her dad so he wouldn't just have this dark cloud over him during December. And she thought, well, my dad loves getting mail, and so she put it on Facebook and said, my dad's really down this time of year. Could you send him a card to help cheer him up? And to her delight, they did. That first year, 30 of her friends and family sent George cards, and she said it carried him through the whole month, getting those cards. They'd served their purpose. He would read them all, he'd respond to them, he'd tape them up on the wall, and look at them every single day. And so she did it each year. In late November, she would post, and people would send, even some strangers. It was from 32, and then it was 50, and then in 1 year, it got over 100. 102 letters came their way. But then last year, she said the card count, for whatever reason, plummeted to 14. And you could just sort of see the air go out of him. He was disappointed when he'd go to the mailbox and there wouldn't be a card that day. She said of her father, he's suffering because he misses my mom. This year, she decided, after all the experience of last year and walking through yet another difficult December with him, she said, that's not going to happen again. And so she put out a request earlier than usual, but then she got her daughter to help. Her daughter was more social media savvy. She put it on her Instagram. They did a TikTok. They shared it far and wide, and wouldn't you know, it went viral. It was a simple request. Just send a Christmas card to George. It helps him get through the holiday. He goes to the porch every day and checks the mail. Hope you can find it in your heart to send him one. And that was it. Well, it did go viral. The card collecting effort exploded this year, and George has received earlier in December 10,000 cards in only 8 days. This is the biggest, best thing that could have ever happened to him. It's just going on and on. We're averaging 2,000 cards a day. Cards have come from the United States, from Canada, the United Kingdom, Europe, South America, Australia, and Asia. Some are handcrafted by kids, others written by adults. Some cards showcase cute Christmas drawings, and many express empathy for George's holiday grief. I see he has a little buddy to help him read his cards each day. The letters were amazing. Every day, the mail carrier shows up with several boxes of cards, and George excitedly ventures to the front porch to receive them, and he reads them. And George was telling this reporter, you know what, people are good. People are good. In addition to the cards, he's received gifts. He's gotten candy and cheese platters and stuffed animals and gift cards and pajamas and a handmade scarf. But George's favorite card, the one he's held onto this year, is from a 4-year-old girl named Nina. And she wrote simply on a homemade card, "I love you, George. You're my best friend. Merry Christmas." And included a drawing of a Christmas tree. And he says, "You know what, it's just unbelievable." And he said, "I still miss my wife. The unexpected show of support from people has made this holiday a happy one. I can't stop smiling." So what do we learn about joy from this story? Well, George certainly experienced joy through this, but he was also happy. The circumstances of receiving all of these cards made George happy, and when he didn't receive them, that happiness had gone away the year before. You see how happiness is contingent on the things that happen to us and the things we receive. But I was thinking of is, what about all of these people who were moved to send George a card? Imagine what it would be like knowing that this is such a simple act and what difference it'll make for his holiday. Those who are giving were the ones who received joy. This is what I think we learn. This is what, and it sounds counterintuitive, but we receive joy by giving it away. We receive joy by giving it away. It really is better to give than to receive. True joy lies in the act of giving without an expectation of receiving something in return. And this is actually something that psychiatrists have studied, of looking at what happens, when you have the brain chemicals that release that help us experience pleasure or happiness, those emotions when good things happen. And when you receive something or something good happens, they said the experience of happiness, it lasts, but just for a little while, and then it kind of dissipates. But when somebody gives and makes someone's life a little better or is serving in some way, those brain chemicals, is endorphin or one of those, I always get them mixed up, it actually lasts for days on end. 3-4 times longer. It literally is better to give than to receive. That's how we experience joy. All those cards and gifts George received made him happy, and it's a wonderful story. But those who gave experienced joy. We receive it by giving it away, and I think that's its secret. And James points us to that in chapter 2, and he's talking about faith, right? And he says, what good is it if people say they have faith but have nothing to show it? Claiming to have faith can't save anyone, can it? Faith is dead when it doesn't result in faithful activity. Someone might claim, you have faith and I have action, but how can I see your faith apart from your actions? Instead, I'll show you my faith by putting it into practice in faithful action. And I think what James is saying about faith is true about joy. What good is it for you to say, I have joy? To sing songs about joy, to proclaim the joy of the season, but do nothing to share it. Joy is dead when it doesn't result in joyful action. Or to put it another way, there's a Swedish proverb that says, shared joy is double joy, but shared sorrow is half sorrow. It's counterintuitive, but for those who have shared joy and shared sorrows with others, know that this is so true. It may be too late to send George a card for this year, but there are those all around us, people that you know, who need to have joy shared with them this year. They need that gift. We can share that joy just by making a phone call, just by writing that card, just by reaching out to someone. We can share that joy by offering the invitation or making room at our tables, including those who might otherwise be left out. We can share joy by being empathetic, making sure people know that they're not alone. We know what they're going through. Sometimes we don't want to say anything or we think we might be imposing, but it's simply an act of love to let them know that they're seen and not alone. We can share joy by serving. On Thursday, the families from Miami Park came to pick up the presents for our giving tree. And thank you for those who participated in that, and to see, our hallways lined up with all of those gifts that people so thoughtfully brought and beautifully packaged, all ready to go. And the look on the parents' faces of just one more act, it's going to make them so happy. But I know those who participated, it's such a joy, so much so that people start asking us about the giving tree months in advance. When is that going to be ready? I'm looking forward to getting those gifts this year. And every single week at Tuesday morning outreach, at the Tuesday ministries, Terry, you're always talking about we're sharing joy. We're bringing joy. People come here because they're looking for help. They're looking for help with getting an ID, or they're looking for clothes, they're looking for a bicycle, they're looking for a warm meal. But what we want to give them is joy, the joy we have in serving. To be a living Christmas, we can find joy by giving it away. How can you give joy away this year? Because I promise you, if you give yourself to making someone else's day, someone else's week, someone else's Christmas just a little bit better, you'll make room in your own hearts for joy to flood in. It'll make all the difference in the world. To adapt a quote often attributed to John Wesley, share all the joy you can, by all the means you can, and all the ways you can, and all the places you can, at all times you can, to all the people you can, as long as ever you can. Let's share the joy this Christmas.